roaring fire in a gilded cage, my daughter shivering on the porch. I kicked the door open, her icy hand in mine, and said a journalist's final words. "This isn't over, not by a long shot.
Not by a long shot.
My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 30 years my life was a symphony of chaos and danger. From the sun-scorched plains of Kandahar to the shattered streets of Kiev, I'd hunted for truth, my camera a shield and a sword. I'd captured the raw, unvarnished ugliness of the world, believing that by exposing it, I could bring a sliver of light. My body was a map of old scars, my mind a library of ghosts, but my heart, though weathered, beat with a fierce, unwavering rhythm. It was a rhythm set by one person, my daughter Clara. Clara was my anchor, the one pure and beautiful thing in my life. While I was chasing headlines across the globe, she was my beacon, a voice on the phone that could calm the storm inside me. I missed birthdays, Christmases, and 1,000 small moments, always telling myself it was for a greater good. But this Christmas I was done. I wanted to surprise her. I'd walked away from a career that had defined me, traded my flak jacket for a winter coat, and flown halfway across the country. I was home, my boots crunched on the thick, pristine snow of what was supposed to be Clara's happy home in Aspen. The winter air was a cruel, biting thing, a stark contrast to the welcoming glow that spilled from the house's grand picture windows. Through the glass, I saw a scene of perfect bourgeois bliss. A long mahogany table groaned under the weight of a feast, a golden brown turkey, a bowl of glistening cranberry sauce, and a multitude of gleaming wine glasses. The scent of roasted pine and expensive perfume seemed to waft through the air even from outside. The Gideons, my son-in-law Marcus's family, were all there. The patriarch, Senator Gideon, sat at the head of the table, his posture as rigid and unbending as his reputation. His wife, Patricia, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, held a crystal glass with an air of practiced nonchalance. Marcus, my daughter's husband, was a picture of a man on the rise, a tailored suit, a confident laugh that echoed across the room. His sister Isabella was there too, her laughter sharp and quick, surrounded by her own children. They were a tableau of power and privilege, raising their glasses in a toast, their faces aglow with the warmth of the roaring fireplace. But where was my daughter? My heart, a compass always pointing to Clara, began to twist with a familiar unease. I'd pictured her at the center of this scene, a radiant smile on her face, the way she used to be. A sudden faint noise cut through the festive sounds, a soft whimper. I frowned, scanning the room again, my gaze lingering on the empty chairs, the plates without a person, and then my eyes snagged on something outside, tucked away on the dark porch, half hidden by a snow-covered planter. My blood turned to ice. My daughter was curled in a wicker chair, her body a small, trembling knot. She wore only a thin cotton nightgown, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably against the biting cold. Her pale face was streaked with what looked like melted snow, and her hair, usually a cascade of golden curls, was matted and wet. My heart, a warrior's drum for so long, now pounded with a different kind of fury. It was the primal, visceral rage of a mother. I ran to her, my boots slipping on the slick ice, every thought in my head dissolving into a single panicked word. "Clara!" I shed my heavy coat, wrapping it around her, feeling the shocking cold of her skin. It was the same chilling cold I'd felt on the wind-whipped faces of refugees, but this was my flesh and blood, my child. She lifted her face, her eyes red-rimmed and empty, her lips barely parting to whisper, "Mom?" Her voice was so faint it was swallowed by the cold air. I scooped her into my arms, her body as light as a handful of dust. I'd held her 1,000 times as a child, but never like this. Never with her hands so cold, her body so fragile. Through the window, the boisterous laughter continued, a careless, cruel sound that felt like a personal insult. I heard Marcus's voice, loud and full of braggadocio, and then the whole family erupting in more laughter. They were warm, full, and happy, while my daughter was an outcast, a shivering wisp of a person. The rage, a familiar friend from my war reporting days, took over. It wasn't the slow burn of political injustice. It was a firestorm of personal violation. I cradled Clara tightly, her breath a weak pulse against my neck. I didn't care about the cold, the Gideons' pristine house, or their perfect Christmas. I cared about one thing, getting her out of there. But a part of me, the part that had documented injustice for a living, knew I couldn't just leave. I had to make them see. I had to make them pay. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I would not walk away. I would not be silent. I would do what I did best. I would expose their cruelty, even if it meant a war. The moment stretched into an eternity. I was a ghost on their front porch, a silent observer of a crime. I felt the weight of my past, all the stories I'd told for others, and I knew now this was my story to tell. I held my daughter tighter and turned to face the brightly lit window. The laughter inside felt like a countdown. My hands, which had navigated minefields, now trembled with a different kind of intensity. This wasn't a war zone. This was something far more dangerous. This was personal. This was my daughter. I felt her shiver against me, a silent accusation against the people inside, and I knew what I had to do. I carried her toward the door, a woman on a mission, a mother with a fury that could melt the snow beneath her feet. I was no longer a journalist. I was an avenging angel, and this Christmas, justice would be served. My fists, honed from years of holding a camera in hostile environments, pounded on the oaken door, the sound a brutal counterpoint to the chirpy, festive music that blared from within. Jingle bells. The irony was a cruel blade. The door remained shut. I hammered again, harder this time, my knuckles protesting with a dull ache. My rage was a physical force demanding entry. Finally, the door swung open. A young woman, Marcus's sister Isabella, stood there, a glass of champagne in her hand, her face a mask of practiced politeness. Her eyes widened slightly as they landed on me, then narrowed with a flicker of annoyance. "Eleanor," she said, her voice syrupy and fake. "What a surprise. You could have called." I didn't dignify her with a response. My gaze was a cold, hard thing, fixed on the brightly lit living room beyond her. I saw Senator Gideon rise slowly from his chair, a look of surprise and thinly veiled disdain on his face. His wife, Patricia, took a delicate sip of her wine, her lips pursed in an expression of quiet disapproval. Marcus, my daughter's husband, appeared behind Isabella, a confident, self-satisfied smirk on his face. He held a bottle of wine, his movements casual and condescending. "Mom, just ignore her," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "She's just trying to make a scene." My blood boiled. I lifted Clara, who was still trembling in my arms, her face hidden against my shoulder. "A scene?" I growled, my voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You think this is a scene? What did you do to my daughter?" Marcus glanced at Clara with a look of annoyance, a dismissive flick of his hand. "She just wanted some fresh air," he said, his smirk widening. "She's always so dramatic." "Just come inside, Eleanor. Don't make a fuss." I felt Clara flinch in my arms, her body shrinking. The world seemed to stop spinning. My mind replayed the last words of Marcus. Just wanted some fresh air. I looked at him, at his perfectly tailored suit, at the warm, inviting room behind him, and then I looked down at my daughter, wrapped in my coat, her body shaking from the cold. The injustice of it was a physical blow. The rage I'd felt on the porch was nothing compared to the fury that consumed me now. I stepped forward, my shoulder ramming the door, sending it flying open and slamming against the wall with a thunderous crash. The festive music abruptly cut off. A horrified gasp echoed through the room as Patricia's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the pristine hardwood floor. The room fell into a terrifying silence, a thick, suffocating tension replacing the cheerful chaos. I walked into the center of the living room, leaving a trail of melted snow from my boots on the polished floor. Every eye was on me. Marcus's face was now a mask of shock and fury. Senator Gideon's calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, menacing stare. I gently placed Clara on a plush couch, draping my scarf over her shoulders, my hands still trembling with a mix of rage and maternal instinct. Her hands were still icy, her entire body a vessel of shivering defeat. I knelt, looking into her vacant eyes, trying to give her a piece of my strength. The Gideons' fireplace crackled, but the room felt colder than the winter night outside. "You don't get to make a scene in my house, Eleanor," Marcus said, his voice a low hiss, a pathetic attempt to regain his authority. I shot to my feet, my voice a whip crack in the silent room. "My house? You think this is a house? A house is a place of shelter, of love. This," I gestured to the room, to the uneaten feast, to the cold, judgmental faces, "is a cage of cruelty." The senator stepped forward, his posture rigid. "That's enough, Eleanor. This is a family matter. My son and my daughter-in-law have had a disagreement." "A disagreement?" I scoffed, my voice thick with disbelief. "You call throwing my daughter out into the freezing cold a disagreement? A woman who has endured more pain than you could ever imagine?" I looked at the feast, the golden turkey, the sparkling wine, and my blood boiled hotter. "You feast and drink while she freezes outside. You talk of family, but you treat her like a stray dog. You are a disgrace." Isabella's voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the tension. "What's she good for anyway? A woman who can't even hold a child to term?" Her words, a dagger to my heart, struck Clara even harder. Clara's shoulders slumped, her eyes filling with tears. Marcus, with a cruel smile on his face, said, "Maybe she just can't do anything right." I saw red. My journalism had taught me to be impartial, to be an observer, but in that moment, I was a mother first. The rage, the helplessness I'd felt for her, all came flooding out. I would not let this go. I would not let them win. This wasn't a fight. This was a war. I reached into my coat and pulled out my phone. My hand shook, but I found the right number. "Hello?" I said, my voice cold as ice. "Leo, it's Eleanor. I need your help. I think I'm about to file a report for domestic abuse." The Gideons' smug faces froze. The subtle smile on Senator Gideon's face vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. The game had just changed. This was no longer a private family dispute. This was a battle for justice, and I was going to win. I was a journalist, a storyteller, and a mother. I had all the tools I needed, and I wasn't leaving until I'd exposed their every cruel, disgusting secret. I looked at my daughter and promised her and myself that I would not rest until she was free. I had spent my life seeking justice for the voiceless. Now my voice would be her shield. I gripped the phone, ready for the fight of my life. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the war correspondent. I was Eleanor Vance, the mother, and I was going to burn down their world. My call to Leo, a brilliant young lawyer who I'd once helped get an internship, hung in the air like a detonation. The Gideons' pristine, elegant world seemed to fracture under the weight of my words. Marcus's face, a moment ago so arrogant, contorted with a mix of disbelief and panic. He lunged forward, his voice a desperate low growl. "You're bluffing! You wouldn't dare!" I met his gaze head-on, my own eyes cold and unwavering. "Try me," I whispered. "You pushed me. You pushed my daughter. You pushed your family's cruelty too far, and now you're going to pay the price." Senator Gideon, a man used to holding all the cards, stepped in. His voice, once booming with authority, was now a measured, dangerous hiss. "Eleanor, we can resolve this. This is a private matter. We can handle it without this." He gestured dismissively toward my phone. I scoffed. "A private matter? When my daughter is sitting on that couch, a ghost of her former self? When she's been starved of food and warmth, of love and respect? No, Senator. This is no longer private. This is a criminal act." Patricia, the matriarch, glided forward, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite hide the smugness in her eyes. "My dear, it's not what you think. Clara is just fragile. She has a delicate constitution. We were simply trying to give her a moment of peace." A fresh wave of fury surged through me. My hands, which had so recently been clutching Clara's icy form, now balled into fists. "Peace? You call this peace? You call your daughter-in-law a delicate constitution because she has endured 4 miscarriages. Because she has lost 4 children? And all the while you mock her, you humiliate her, you cast her out into the cold like a worthless piece of garbage? My voice, once a whisper, now boomed with the force of a full-throated roar. I gestured toward the untouched feast, the sparkling wine, the crackling fireplace. This isn't a family dinner. This is a celebration of cruelty. This is a display of power, a power you use to break the spirit of a kind, loving woman who once believed your son loved her. Marcus's face was a study in pure hatred. He took a step toward me, his hands clenched. "Don't you dare talk about my family that way." "Your family?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "This isn't a family. This is a club, and you have exiled the only person who ever truly loved you." I turned my gaze on Senator Gideon. "You, sir, are a judge, a figure of authority, a man who claims to stand for justice. Yet, in your own home, you practice the most grotesque form of injustice. You have allowed your family to break my daughter, to strip her of her dignity, and now you stand here, trying to sweep it all under the rug." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. The Gideons, accustomed to wielding power and influence, had never faced a direct public accusation like this. They had always operated in the shadows, their cruelty hidden behind a veneer of respectability. I, a journalist who had spent her life exposing such hypocrisy, was their worst nightmare. I looked at Clara, who was still huddled on the couch, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My heart ached for her, for the innocence that had been stolen from her, for the love that had been so brutally twisted into a weapon of humiliation. In that moment, all my training, all my experience, all my journalistic instincts kicked in. I knew what to do. I had to get her out of here. I gently approached the couch and knelt beside her. "Clara," I whispered, my voice as soft and comforting as I could make it. "It's time to go home." "We're leaving." She looked up at me, her eyes a watery mess of fear and confusion. "Mom, please don't," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I just want it to be over." "I know, sweetheart," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "But it will never be over as long as you stay here. You deserve so much more than this. You deserve peace, and you deserve a family that loves you for who you are, not for what you can do, and I will give that to you." I lifted her into my arms, the sheer physical act of carrying her a defiance against the Gideons' contempt. Marcus watched me, his face a mask of pure rage. "Don't you dare!" he hissed. "If you take her, you will lose everything. You will lose your reputation, your life. You think you can threaten me?" I laughed, a cold, empty sound. "I've been in places where a threat is a bullet, not a whisper. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You are about to face a force you cannot control. You think you can buy justice? You think you can manipulate a verdict? You will learn that some things are not for sale. A mother's love, her fury, that is priceless. And I will make you pay for every tear, every shiver, every cruel word you ever uttered to my daughter." I carried Clara out of the house, leaving the Gideons standing in a stunned, horrified silence. The door slammed shut behind us, a final period on a sentence of cruelty. The cold night air was a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the house. I had no idea what the future held, what legal battles lay ahead, or what price I would pay for this defiance. But in my arms, I held the only thing that mattered. And for her, I would wage a war. A war not for territory, but for a soul. I had been a journalist for 30 years. I had seen it all. But this was the fight of my life, and I would not lose. I would make sure of it. I would use every connection, every skill, every lesson I had ever learned. This was my final assignment, my most important story, and I would not rest until it had a just ending. I would not let them win, never, not ever, not while I had a breath left in my body. We arrived at my small, unassuming apartment near the university, a world away from the Gideons' sterile opulence. The space, with its worn leather sofa and a mismatched collection of travel souvenirs, was a testament to a life lived on the road. It wasn't much, but it was safe. I gently settled Clara on the sofa, her body still trembling, her eyes wide and vacant. I wrapped a warm blanket around her, my hands hovering over her as if I could magically transfer my own warmth to her. "Clara," I whispered, "you're safe now." She didn't respond. her gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. The profound emptiness in her eyes tore at my soul. This wasn't the vibrant, joyful daughter I knew. This was a shell of a person, her spirit shattered. I felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, searing regret for every moment I had spent away, chasing stories instead of being with her. I made her a cup of chamomile tea, its sweet, earthy aroma filling the room. "Drink this," I said, placing the mug in her hands. "It will help you warm up." She just stared at it, the mug trembling in her grasp. The simple act of holding it seemed to require a monumental effort. It was a painful reminder of how broken she was, a testament to the Gideons' silent psychological violence. They had not just hurt her. They had hollowed her out. My phone buzzed and I saw Leo's name on the screen. I stepped into the small kitchen, my voice a low, urgent whisper. "Leo, it's Eleanor. We're at my place. I need you here. Now." "Eleanor," he said, his voice a mix of relief and concern. "What's going on?" "I heard about the scene you made. I just got off the phone with my mentor. He said Senator Gideon called the DA directly. They're already trying to bury this." My jaw tightened. I knew it. He's already using his influence. That's why I called you, Leo. I need someone who isn't afraid of him. I need someone who will fight for what's right, no matter the cost. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost picture him, the young, brilliant lawyer who had once been my intern, who had idolized me for my courage. He knew the risks. Senator Gideon's reach was long, his power absolute. Going up against him could mean the end of his career before it even began. "I'm in, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm. "I owe you. You were the one who taught me that a good journalist, a good lawyer, never backs down from a fight. I'll be there in an hour. Don't talk to anyone. Don't do anything. Just stay put." A wave of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone. I had an ally, a young lion who was ready to fight. I hung up the phone and walked back into the living room, my gaze falling on Clara. Her head was still bowed, her body a small, fragile knot on the sofa. I knew this was going to be a long, arduous journey. As the hours passed, I sat by Clara's side, a silent vigil. She finally drifted into a fitful sleep, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Just as I thought she was finally at peace, a sudden noise outside jolted me. A thick, ominous envelope slid under the door, silent as a whisper. My heart pounded against my ribs. I picked it up, my hands trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper with crudely scrawled letters. "Stay out of it, or you'll end up as miserable as your daughter." I crumpled the note in my hand, my blood boiling hotter than the tea on the counter. The Gideons, with their subtle threats and their quiet cruelty, had underestimated me. They thought a piece of paper would scare me. They thought I would back down. They were wrong. This isn't a threat. It was a declaration of war, and I was going to use every weapon in my arsenal. I pulled out a box of old files from my closet, papers from my long-ago past. I found what I was looking for, the address of an old colleague, a brilliant investigative journalist named Adrian. I knew he was the only person who could help me. The Gideons thought they could control the narrative. They thought they could manipulate the legal system. But I knew the power of a story, the power of a lie exposed, and I was going to tell the world a story so raw, so emotional, that it would shake their world to its very core. I was no longer a journalist fighting for the truth. I was a mother fighting for her daughter's life. The lines had blurred, and I was ready to do whatever it took to win. The Gideons had made a mistake. They had underestimated a mother's love. They had underestimated my fury, and they were about to pay the ultimate price. I would not rest. I would not sleep. I would not stop until they had nothing left. The war had just begun, and I was going to win. I had to. For Clara. For us. Leo arrived, his face a grim mask, a worn briefcase in his hand. He took one look at Clara, still sleeping fitfully on the sofa, and his expression softened. "My God, Eleanor," he whispered. "They didn't just hurt her. They broke her." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I had spent the night going through Clara's belongings, sifting through her phone, her laptop, searching for a sign, a clue, anything. The Gideons had been so careful, so precise in their cruelty. There were no bruises, no visible scars. Their weapon was emotional manipulation, a slow, insidious poison that had eaten away at my daughter's soul. "I need you to look at this," I said, handing him Clara's laptop. I had found a hidden folder, a digital diary she had kept. Page after page of her words, a raw, unfiltered chronicle of her despair. She wrote about her 4 miscarriages, each one a shattering blow to her dream of becoming a mother. She wrote about Marcus's cold indifference, about Patricia's biting insults, about Isabella's cruel jokes. She wrote about how they had stripped her of her dignity, how they had made her feel worthless, a burden, a failure. Leo read, his face growing paler with each passing page. He was a young man, a rising star in his field, but this was a different kind of darkness. This was a story of a woman's spirit being slowly extinguished. The legal system, with its focus on tangible evidence, would have a hard time grasping this level of emotional abuse. "This is heartbreaking, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it's not enough. They'll just say it's a fabrication, the rantings of a crazy woman. Senator Gideon's influence is too great. We need something more concrete." I nodded, my mind racing. "I know," I said. "I've been thinking. Marcus is a lawyer. He's too smart to leave a paper trail. But what about money? Where did all the money I sent to Clara go? I sent her thousands over the years, for furniture, for her medical bills, for everything. But she never bought anything. Where did it all go?" Leo's eyes lit up. "That's our angle. Financial abuse. If we can prove he was siphoning money from her account, we have a clear, tangible case." For the next week, my small apartment became a war room. The worn leather sofa was covered in stacks of bank statements, tax documents, and legal forms. I worked with Leo, my journalistic instincts kicking in, to unravel the Gideons' web of deceit. It wasn't just Marcus. We discovered that Senator Gideon had also set up a trust fund in Clara's name, but the money was being funneled into a shell corporation he owned. It was a scheme to evade taxes, a common practice among the elite, but it was also a tangible piece of evidence. We also found something else, something far more sinister. A hidden file on Clara's laptop, a series of emails between Marcus and his mother, Patricia. The emails were filled with vile insults, with mockery about Clara's miscarriages, with plans to manipulate her into signing away her rights to the house. In one email, Patricia wrote, "She's so pathetic. Let's make her sign the papers on Christmas Eve. It will be the perfect gift to ourselves." I read the words, my blood running cold. I looked at Clara, sleeping peacefully on the sofa, and I felt a fresh wave of fury. They had planned this. They had orchestrated this humiliation, this slow, deliberate destruction of my daughter. "Eleanor, this is huge," Leo said, his voice filled with a quiet triumph. "This is a smoking gun. This is the evidence we need." I nodded, but my heart was heavy. This wasn't just about winning a legal case. This was about exposing a sickness, a deep-seated cruelty that I had only ever read about in my journalism. I had always believed that evil was something that happened in war-torn countries, in the dark corners of the world. But now I knew that it could also reside in a grand house in Aspen, in a family that wore a veneer of respectability. I had been a journalist for 30 years, and I had seen a lot of injustice. But this was different. This was personal. This was my daughter. I looked at the emails, at the bank statements, at the digital diary, and I felt a surge of determination. I was going to fight. I was going to win. I was going to make sure that the world saw the Gideons for what they really were, a family of monsters. And I wouldn't stop until I had destroyed them. My final assignment was to find justice for my daughter. And I was going to get it, no matter the cost. The day of the trial dawned, cold and gray, a perfect reflection of my heart. I sat in the courtroom, my hand clutching Clara's icy one. She was a ghost in a sea of pinstriped suits and somber faces. Her eyes, once so full of life, were now hollow and haunted, fixed on the ground. She looked like she wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the air. I squeezed her hand, trying to silently transmit my strength to her, but I knew it was a futile gesture. She had been through too much. The Gideons arrived, a perfectly polished tableau of power and privilege. Senator Gideon, his posture as rigid as a statue, walked with an air of unassailable authority. He had a faint, arrogant smile on his lips, the smile of a man who was used to getting his way. Marcus, my son-in-law, in a custom-tailored suit, exuded a smug confidence. His sister Isabella and his mother Patricia sat behind them, their faces a mask of quiet condescension. They looked at us with a cold, detached air, as if we were nothing more than a minor annoyance, a problem to be solved and then forgotten. The judge, a man with a cold, expressionless face, entered the courtroom. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was an invisible thread between him and Senator Gideon, a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of recognition that spoke volumes. It was a rigged game, and I, a veteran journalist, had walked into it with my eyes wide open. Our lawyer, Leo, a brilliant young man, stood up to present our case. He was the only ray of hope in this dark, suffocating room. He spoke with a passion and a conviction that was a stark contrast to the cold formality of the courtroom. He presented the emails, the bank statements, the digital diary. He spoke of the emotional abuse, the years of silent suffering, the slow, insidious destruction of a woman's spirit. He spoke of the 4 miscarriages, of the humiliation, of the final act of cruelty on Christmas Eve. His voice was a powerful symphony of truth, each word a hammer blow against the Gideons' web of lies. But the Gideons' lawyer, a cold, calculating man with a sharp tongue, was quick to counter. He dismissed our evidence as fabricated, as the lies of a vengeful woman. He called Clara a manipulative liar, a lazy freeloader who had used her mental health as an excuse to avoid her responsibilities. He called a witness, a distant relative of the Gideons, who painted Clara as a difficult, demanding woman who had been nothing but a burden to the family. My blood boiled. My hands, which had so recently held my daughter, now clenched into fists. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to expose their lies to the world. But I knew I couldn't. I was an observer now, a silent witness to a grotesque injustice. Then the Gideons' lawyer played his trump card. He called their old family friend to the stand, a man who had known Clara for years. He spoke of Clara's manipulative nature, her frequent and convenient illnesses, that he said were used to garner sympathy and attention. The words were a fresh dagger in my heart, a cruel perversion of the truth. I looked at Clara, who was now trembling, her face buried in her hands. I knew she was reliving every cruel word, every moment of humiliation. I felt a surge of helpless rage, a feeling I had only experienced when watching a story from afar, never when I was a part of it. The Gideons, with their cold, detached smiles, were watching us, savoring our pain. They had won. They had rigged the game, and we were losing. But then Leo stood up. His voice, once so full of fire, was now calm and measured. He had a look in his eyes that I recognized from my own younger days. It was the look of a person who has nothing left to lose, a person who is willing to do whatever it takes to win. He spoke to the judge, his words a quiet, powerful plea for justice. He spoke of Clara's dignity, of her strength, of her humanity. The judge, however, remained unmoved. The Gideons' lawyer sat there, a smug smile on his face, secure in his victory. I looked at Clara, who was now sobbing silently, and I knew that no matter what happened, we had already lost. The legal system, a place I had once believed in, a place where I had hoped to find justice, had failed us. It was a cold, hard lesson, and my heart was breaking, but I would not give up. I would not let them win. I would find another way to fight. I would fight with the truth. I would fight with my voice. I would fight until they had nothing left. For Clara. For us. The courtroom was a sterile and unforgiving arena, where every glance was a weapon, every word a potential trap. The Gideons' lawyer, a man with a venomous tongue, had called Clara to the witness stand. My daughter, my brave, fragile girl, walked with a trembling uncertainty, her body a small, defeated shadow in the large, imposing chair. I watched her, my heart a raw wound. I wanted to scream, to rush to her side, to shield her from the cruelty that was to come. He began his questioning, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ms. Harper," he began, using her maiden name, a subtle act of erasure, a denial of her marriage. "Let's talk about your alleged depression. You claim you were emotionally abused by the Gideon family. Is that correct?" Clara's voice, a small, barely audible whisper, trembled. "Yes. And yet," he continued, a smirk on his face, "there are no police reports, no restraining orders, no concrete evidence of physical harm. Isn't it true that your claims are merely a fabrication, a desperate attempt to gain a financial windfall from a family that has been nothing but generous to you?" I shot to my feet. "That's a lie!" I shouted, my voice raw with fury. The judge, with a cold, impassive face, slammed his gavel. "Order! Ms. Vance, one more outburst and I will have you removed." I sat back down, my body shaking with rage. I was a journalist, a woman who had faced dictators and warlords. But in this moment, I was powerless. My voice, my words, my fury, all meant nothing here. The lawyer continued, his words like sharp stones thrown at my daughter. He questioned her about her medical history, her 4 miscarriages, each word a cruel reminder of her pain. "Isn't it true, Miss Harper, that you have a history of instability? That your miscarriages were a result of your own poor health, your own weakness? And that the Gideons, a loving, supportive family, were left to clean up your messes?" Clara's shoulders shook, her face contorted in a silent struggle. I saw the tears welling up in her eyes, the pain that had been simmering inside her, threatening to erupt. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I couldn't. I was trapped in this grotesque spectacle, forced to watch my daughter be humiliated. But then something shifted. Clara, my beautiful broken girl, lifted her head. Her eyes, though red with tears, held a flicker of defiance. It was a small, almost imperceptible flame, but it was there. She looked at the lawyer. Her voice, though still trembling, was now clear and steady. "You can call me what you want," she said, her words a quiet indictment. "You can twist my words, you can question my sanity, but you cannot change the truth. My miscarriages were not a sign of my weakness. They were a sign of my pain. And that pain was caused by your family, by a husband who looked at me with contempt, by a family who treated me like a broken toy, by a father-in-law who saw me as nothing more than a political inconvenience." The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Clara. She spoke of the day she had found out about her last miscarriage, the day she had come home, her body aching, her heart shattered, only to find Marcus laughing with his family, ignoring her pain. She spoke of the countless nights she had spent crying, alone, in a house filled with people who were supposed to love her. She spoke of the final act of cruelty on Christmas Eve, the night she had been left to freeze on the porch, a silent outcast. Her voice, once a whisper, now grew stronger, more powerful. The tears streamed down her face, but her words were a river of truth, a raw, unfiltered expression of her agony. "I didn't ask for a financial windfall," she said, her voice a sob. "I didn't ask for anything but love and respect. And for that you destroyed me. You took away my hope, my dignity, my will to live. You broke me. But I am not a liar. I am a survivor." Her words echoed in the silence, a testament to her courage, a living indictment of the Gideons' cruelty. The lawyer, for the first time, was speechless. He stood there, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He had expected a broken woman, a silent victim. He had not expected a warrior. I looked at her, my heart swelling with a fierce pride. My daughter, the girl who had been reduced to a shivering shell, had found her voice. She had faced her demons and she had won. The battle in the courtroom was far from over. But in that moment, in her raw, emotional testimony, she had already won the most important victory. She had reclaimed her soul. The judge's voice, dry and impassive, cut through the suffocating silence of the courtroom. "The court has reached a verdict," he said. his words devoid of any emotion. I gripped Clara's hand, my knuckles white, my heart a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I looked at the Gideons, at their cold, confident faces. They knew. They had always known. The court grants the divorce request of the plaintiff, Clara Harper, and the defendant, Marcus Gideon, he announced. A wave of relief, hot and powerful, washed over me. Clara's shoulders slumped, a small sob escaping her lips. It was a victory, however small. The first step toward her freedom. But the judge was not finished. However, he continued, his words a hammer blow to my heart, the court finds insufficient legal evidence of domestic abuse. As for the division of assets, the court awards the majority of the property to the defendant, Marcus Gideon, in light of his greater financial contribution to the marriage. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The words hit me like a physical blow. Insufficient legal evidence. I thought of Clara's digital diary, her painful words, the emails, the bank statements. All of it dismissed. I looked at Senator Gideon, at his faint, smug smile. He had done it. He had used his power, his influence, to manipulate the verdict, to subvert justice. He was a judge, a man who had sworn to uphold the law, and he had used that very system to destroy my daughter. This is so unfair, I cried out, my voice raw with pain and rage. This isn't justice. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! Ms. Vance, I will have you removed from this courtroom. I felt Clara's hand on mine, her eyes wide with panic. Mom, please, she whispered. Just stop. It's over. But it wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Marcus sauntered over, his face a mask of triumph. He leaned close to my ear, his words a venomous whisper. See, Eleanor? I told you. You're just a useless old woman. He shot a mocking glance at Clara, a smirk on his face before turning and walking away, his steps heavy with a sick kind of victory. I wanted to lunge at him, to land a punch on his arrogant face. I wanted to unleash the fury that was consuming me. But a hand on my shoulder stopped me. It was Leo. His face was a mask of pure rage, his fists clenched, his body a rigid line of barely contained fury. I saw my own anger reflected in his eyes. He had fought so hard, believed so deeply, only to be defeated by a corrupt system. But just as he was about to do something he would regret, Clara rushed to his side. She grabbed his arm, her body trembling with fear, her voice a raw sob. No, Leo. Please don't. I don't want you to become like them. I just want peace. I just want to live my life. Her words, a cry of pure, unadulterated pain, silenced the room. The cameras flashed, a journalist in the back corner capturing the moment. My broken daughter clinging to her young lawyer, a silent plea for an end to the violence, an end to the anger. I looked around the room. A woman in the back row was wiping tears from her eyes. A man shook his head in a quiet sorrow. They had seen it. They had witnessed the injustice. The legal system had failed us, but the people had seen the truth. The judge slammed his gavel, his voice a sharp command. The session is over. The courtroom is adjourned. But for me, the gavel's sound was a declaration of war. I helped Clara up, her body a fragile, trembling weight in my arms. I looked at Marcus, at Patricia, at Senator Gideon, their faces a mix of triumph and smug satisfaction. They had won the battle, but they had not won the war. I had spent my life as a journalist, a woman who had documented corruption and injustice. I knew the power of a story, the power of a truth revealed. And I was going to tell the world a story that would shake them to their core. A story of a powerful family, a rigged trial, and a woman who had lost everything but her will to fight. I would not rest until I had exposed every one of their lies. I would not rest until I had won. For Clara. For us. The world outside the courtroom was a whirlwind of a different kind. The video of Clara's silent plea, of my raw fury, of Leo's barely contained rage, went viral. It was a single visceral moment of human vulnerability, a stark contrast to the sterile, calculated cruelty of the Gideons. The image of my daughter, my brave, beautiful girl, clinging to a young lawyer, her face streaked with tears, her voice a quiet sob, touched something deep in the hearts of millions. The media, a force I knew so well, picked up the story with a ferocious appetite. My old colleagues, the journalists I had worked with, the ones who had trusted me with their lives in war zones, now came to me. They wanted the full story. They wanted the details. They wanted to expose the truth. I gave it to them. I sat in my apartment, a new kind of war room, and spoke to a world hungry for justice. I told them about the emails, the bank statements, the hidden trust funds. I told them about the years of emotional abuse, about the 4 miscarriages, about the final, humiliating act of cruelty on Christmas Eve. I told them about the rigged trial, about the biased judge, about Senator Gideon's silent, manipulative power. I told them about the love that was supposed to be in a family and the betrayal that had taken its place. My words, once a whisper in a courtroom, were now a roar in a world hungry for truth. The headlines screamed, "Senator Gideon's justice system exposed." A mother's fury, the story of a broken daughter, the price of a rigged verdict. The Gideons, a family that had built their empire on a foundation of lies and manipulation, were now facing a different kind of justice. The public, a jury of millions, had reached their own verdict. The Gideons, for the first time in their lives, were on the defensive. Senator Gideon, a man used to wielding power with impunity, was now a figure of scorn. His political career, once a shining beacon, was now a tarnished relic. He was forced to resign from his position, his reputation in tatters, his legacy reduced to a single damning word: corrupt. Marcus, the arrogant son-in-law, was now a pariah in the legal community. He lost his job, his clients, his reputation. He was a laughingstock, a symbol of a man who had lost everything for a victory that was built on a foundation of lies. And Patricia and Isabella, the 2 women who had mocked my daughter, were now social outcasts. Their friends, their circles, their lives, all of it crumbled under the weight of their own cruelty. They were forced to retreat into the shadows, their names forever associated with a story of a mother's love and a family's betrayal. Clara, in the midst of this chaos, was slowly, painfully healing. She was no longer a ghost. She was a woman, a survivor. She watched the news with a quiet, a solemn look in her eyes. The justice she had been denied in the courtroom was now being served by the people, and she found a strange, a beautiful kind of peace in it. Leo, my brave young lawyer, was now a hero. He was a symbol of a young man who had stood up to power, who had fought for what was right, and who had won. He was offered a prestigious position at a top law firm, a firm that specialized in human rights cases. But he turned it down. He wanted to work with me, to help people like Clara, people who had been failed by a corrupt system. I looked at him, at his kind, steady eyes, and I knew that the battle was far from over. But we were no longer fighting alone. We were fighting with the truth, with the voice of the people, with a force that was stronger than any courtroom, any judge, any senator. I had spent my life as a journalist, a woman who had documented corruption and injustice. Now I was a mother, a healer, a woman who was helping her daughter find her way back home. And this was my greatest victory. My greatest story. The final act of the story wasn't a courtroom drama or a media expose. It was a quiet morning in my small apartment, the sun streaming through the window, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. Clara was in the kitchen, humming a soft tune as she made herself a cup of tea. Her shoulders, once so hunched with defeat, were now straight. Her eyes, once so empty, now held a spark of life, a glimmer of a future she had once thought was lost forever. She had been through so much. The miscarriages, the emotional abuse, the rigged trial. She had lost everything. But in that loss, she had found herself. She had found her voice. She had found her courage. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. I watched her, my heart full of a quiet, a profound gratitude. The Gideons were gone. Their world was in ruins. But that was not the true victory. The true victory was Clara. The true victory was her smile, the light in her eyes, the life she was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding. Leo was there too, sitting on the sofa, a book in his hand. He looked at Clara, a gentle, a loving look in his eyes. He had been a hero in this story, a young man who had stood up to power, who had fought for justice. But he had also been a friend, a person who had listened, who had comforted, who had stood by Clara when she had nothing left. He had seen her at her worst, and he had loved her still. I had been a journalist for 30 years. I had seen the worst of humanity, the cruelty, the greed, the manipulation. But I had also seen the best. I had seen the courage of ordinary people, the love that could overcome any obstacle, the kindness that could heal any wound. I had spent my life seeking justice, and I had learned that justice was not something you found in a courtroom. It was something you found in your heart. It was in the unwavering love of a mother, a love that could move mountains. It was in the kindness of a young lawyer who was willing to risk everything for a person he barely knew. It was in the courage of a broken woman who found her voice in the face of her abuser. And it was in the resilience of a human spirit that could rise from the ashes of its own destruction. We as a society are so focused on the big stories. We look for the grand gestures, the heroic acts, the legal victories. But the true stories, the ones that matter, are the quiet ones. They are the stories of women who suffer in silence, of families who break hearts instead of mending them, of people who find the courage to walk away from a life that is destroying them. My daughter's story is a testament to the power of love, the strength of the human spirit, and the enduring truth that some battles are fought not in a courtroom, but in the heart. And the greatest victory is not a gavel's sound, but a smile from a loved one. We were once broken, but now we are healed. We were once lost, but now we are home. If my daughter's story touched your heart, if you felt her pain, her courage, her triumph, then I ask you to do one thing. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and share this story with someone you love. Let's create a community where every story is a candle, every story is a song, every story is a light that can guide someone home. And remember, no matter how broken you are, no matter how lost you feel, you are a survivor, and you are not alone. And for that, there is always hope.